I am Larry Hoy, biker, writer, legend, and this is the first chapter podcast. So grab yourself a drink, sit back, relax. Let's go get started with this. Today's book is by my buddy Lee Thompson, Jeremy's Kiss. This is going to be a vampire murder mystery, a little bit of a horror run. So let's get on it. Jeremy's Kiss by Lee Thompson. All right. First things first, let's go see what Amazon has to say about it. What lengths are you willing to go for the truth and vengeance? In a world where vampires, mages, and werewolves live hidden in plain sight among the human population, three people are swept up into the machinations of Omaha's most powerful vampires. Lilith is a bodyguard for a formidable vampire who's given her everything she needs, but her heart thirsts for vengeance against the man who took advantage of her as a teenage runaway. The vampire Jeremy is dragged in against his will into the dark world of power amongst the struggles of his own kind, where he must protect himself at all costs. Natalie is focused in completing her degree and never guessed it would lead to the tragic death of the man she loves. Spoiler alert! Come on, Lee. Caught between two worlds, Natalie must work alone to find the murderer and avenge his death. Will Lilith, Jeremy, and Natalie find the answers they need, or will they end up ensnared in situations they may not survive? Let's find out. Prologue. Present day. Natalie stood at the kitchen sink to wash the blood off her hands, the sweet, luxurious blood covering her hands and her right arm up to the elbow. Even the little drops of blood touching her skin on her face and neck felt like little pleasures of life to her skin. The blood was life, the source of her nourishment and immortality. She knew she needed to drink it to survive, but the feel of it on her skin was like a wondrous drug to her senses. The scent of the blood filled her nostrils, urging her to taste it, to drink it, to fill her with life. She could feel her fangs pushing against the inside of her bottom lip. She wouldn't drink any of this blood, though. They deserved to be dead, and she wouldn't allow even a portion of their blood to live inside her. She turned on the water, and thoughts of Lady Macbeth crossed her mind. The image of washing the blood from her hands passed through her mind before her hands even touched the water. The water felt like a bucket of ice thrown onto her while relaxing in the bathtub. Losing the pleasure of the blood on her skin was so intense it felt painful. From the living room behind her, she could feel Steve's sanity slipping. She knew he had just helped kill the man who employed him. He knew the two dead bodies in the living room were as close to friends as he had ever known in his life. He also knew he had been powerless to do anything but help Natalie kill them. He wasn't slipping away from her, though. The link between them was going to last longer than his sanity. The thoughts of sharing his fall into insanity was far more unsettling than washing the blood and flesh from her arms and her hands. Looking back, she wondered how she got to this point. The smell of... Yep, here we go. American Revolutionary War. The smell of gunpowder and wood smoke mingled with the smell of sweat and fear permeating the forest. The bodies of the soldiers wearing homespun clothes lay beside the bodies of the red-coated enemies. Three men hid within the dark, shadowy bushes where the moonlight was unable to permeate through the thick color of leaves in the tall trees around them. They looked over the forest, waiting for the sounds of the four red-coated soldiers to fade away. The soldiers had passed within inches of one of the three and never saw him because he was so well hidden. They could have easily killed the four soldiers as they had killed several other redcoats earlier in the night, but their target was close, and they wouldn't risk him getting away just to kill a few more redcoats in the forest. The three men were part of a dying group that started out with 15 and was now down to 6. Divided into two groups of 3, they were closing in on their target, responsible for the deaths of the remainder of their company. Their target was a respected mayor in the Royal British Army, and he was a vampire. He commanded a division that included an unknown number of vampires, which were responsible for routing at least 3 divisions of the colonial army. They'd always attacked at night and disappeared in the daytime. Usually, after they were done with their attack, they didn't have to worry about a counterattack as most of the colonials were dead or routed. This time was different, though. This time, 11 vampires supported the colonial camp. None of the people in either camp were aware that the vampires were fighting amongst them. The vampires remained careful not and did not allow the people to see that they were more powerful than those they fought beside. The redcoats attacked using the same method that had served them so well in their last few engagements. Under the cover of darkness, they would slowly move in on their enemy's position. Once they were close enough, they would launch a nearly simultaneous attack from all sides. Thanks to a warning from a young colonial captain named Connor and 10 men under his command, the colonial regiment was ready for this attack. They were badly outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought bravely and retreated in an orderly fashion. Surprise worked to their advantage, and they inflicted heavy casualties on the British, but took numerous losses to the superior force. Now the majority of the British force was following the colonial regiment as the regiment retreated. That left a small detail of English soldiers to guard the major and the other officers. They had taken over a small farmhouse that they were now using for their base of operations. The 6 men knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. They suspected at least half of the officers were vampires, and probably 1 or 2 of the guards were also vampires. They divided up into 2 groups of 3. First job was to take out the guards without alerting the occupants inside the house. Once that was done, they were going to charge the house with guns and knives, hoping to surprise the occupants and kill them all. It wasn't much of a plan, but if they didn't do it now, then the major and his command staff would get away, and they wouldn't get another chance without bringing in a much larger force. So 3 men moved silently through the night after the soldiers were clearly passed. They arrived at their destination in less than 20 minutes without seeing any other soldiers in the forest. The farm, still fairly new, the main house was a small 1-room structure with a stone fireplace on one side. A hastily constructed pen was connected to the house, and only a lean-to to serve the shelter of the animals. Both the pen and the lean-to were on opposite sides of the house from where they were now positioning themselves. If the farmer and his family still lived there, then by the end of summer, he would have constructed a better shelter for the animals and something to cover their feed to get them through the winter. The soldiers were sitting around the fire under the lean-to. If everything went according to plan, the other group would take out those 3 soldiers. On this side of the house, there were 2 soldiers. Unfortunately, those 2 weren't looking at a fire. It would be harder to take them by surprise. While under the cover of the trees, Brennan indicated for his first man to attack the guard closest to the door. He would take the other guard. The 3rd man he knew was to follow him in as backup. If either of the first 2 went down, then he would take their place and dispatch the guard and continue into the house with the attack. If they were lucky, the 3rd man would be the first into the house, quickly followed by the 2nd man, Brent and Brennan. They were really lucky. Connor and his 2 vampires would already be in the house, surrounded by the bodies of enemy officers. Once Brennan was sure both men knew their instructions, they turned to execute their plan. Brennan moved to his left to stay under cover as long as possible. The other 2 quickly disappeared into the brush behind them. Once he was in position, Brennan threw a small pebble back in the woods. It hit a tree with a barely audible thump. Another thump followed the first. Brennan charged out of the forest, running as quickly as quietly as possible. The guard turned, but too late and too slow. Brennan's bayonet slid between the guard's ribs and into his lungs. Without breath, the guard couldn't even cry out a warning. Brennan reached out and held the guard's mouth and nose while lowering him to the ground. Once he was down, Brennan drew his knife and sliced through the guard's throat, ensuring he would die quietly. Brennan got up and ran for the door to the house. The other guard was down as quietly as the first. Brennan's 2 comrades were already going inside. Brennan ran past the 2nd guard without looking at him. A shot rang out in the house before Brennan could reach the door. Both of the soldiers with him were already in the house now. Brennan could see they were only barely inside the door, struggling with someone inside. The first soldier fell to his knees from where he was standing. The second went around him, grabbing the first loaded rifle. Brennan entered just in time to see the second soldier and a British officer exchange shots. The British soldier took a hit in the gut, and the soldier with Brennan was hit in the shoulder. Both of them were so close together, the muscle-loaded weapons caught their clothes on fire. The British officer ignored the flames on his uniform and grabbed another rifle to shoot with. Brennan didn't hesitate to raise his own. He shot the officer in the throat, knocking him back against the wall. The officer slid to the floor, clutching at his bloody throat. Brennan lowered his weapon and turned back to his comrades, only in time to witness the first soldier being beheaded by the major wielding a sword. The second soldier to enter the house was already dead in a similar fashion. With unnatural speed, the major rushed Brennan and grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Brennan couldn't believe how quick he was. The major's face was covered with blood and his fangs were exposed. He looked like he had just been feeding. Brennan could only wonder how old this vampire was to be so quick. The rifle dropped from Brennan's hands. The major stood there looking at him and then pulled him close. Brennan felt the steel of the sword slicing through his stomach. "Connor made you," the major said with a distinctly French accent. He didn't ask, just merely stated a fact. The major withdrew his sword from Brennan's stomach and threw him back against the wall with such a force that Brennan felt the bones in his back crack. Brennan fell forward from the wall onto his hands and knees. He could just see the major's feet and knew the major was preparing to chop off his head. Another pair of feet, wearing deerskin moccasins, appeared behind the major. Brennan waited for the blow to come that would end his life forever, but it didn't happen. With effort, he looked up. A vampire caught the major from behind and was drinking his blood. Brennan fell over onto his side and watched as an unknown vampire fed on the major. Once he was done feeding, he tore the major's head from his body. Brennan couldn't believe the strength. He might have been able to duplicate the feat, but not easily. The other vampire looked at the roof and let out a deafening sound that was a combination of a moan and a growl before he ran for the door. Brennan reached out and grabbed the body of the major. Pulling the body close was like torture, but he knew he couldn't stop. Once the body was close enough, Brennan bit into the rapidly cooling flesh. There wasn't much blood left, but he knew he had to drink whatever there was so he could heal himself enough to leave the house. Otherwise, even a human soldier would be able to kill him quickly and easily. Brennan was able to drink enough blood to heal himself some. His back still hurt with every movement, but the bones were knitting back together. The major's body was drained of all the blood. Brennan dragged himself close to the next body. It was the body of one of his own company. Once again, Brennan drank the blood from the body and healed. Connor entered the house while Brennan was drinking the blood from his fallen comrade. With quiet efficiency, Connor drew his own sword and beheaded the last two vampires in the room. The bullets to the heads and necks incapacitated them, but they would have healed eventually. "We're the only two left," Connor said as he helped Brennan to his feet. Together they walked back out into the night. I am Larry Hoy, biker writer legend. You found me here. Make sure that you visit my author page on Facebook. It's Larry Hoy Author. Like it and follow it so that way you get my daily updates and my weekly first chapter readings. If you're an author or if you've got your favorite book out there that I haven't read yet, reach out to me on Facebook. Drop me a PM. And maybe I'll be reading your book next week. But love to see more. If you can support me, I've got a great story out there on Amazon. It is Demon's Kiss, the next book in the Hit World series. I'd love to get one out there to you and put it in your hands. And when you read it and love it like you will, I know you, throw me a review on Amazon, because I hear when you get 50 reviews, they send you a unicorn. Who knew? Anyway, it's been a great time. Have a great one. Talk at you next week.